Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Better Call Saul Season 4, Episode 5, Quite a Ride. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Better Call Saul, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Better Call Saul up to Episode 5 of Season 4. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So, this was not a bad episode at all. It was quite a good episode. There was a lot of really interesting character explorations of Jimmy and a lot of really interesting character moments that really sort of flesh out these characters in this world a bit more. That being said, though, this is probably my least favorite of the season so far. Keep in mind, I've loved this season so far, so it's not, again, make it clear, not a bad episode, not in the slightest, but for me, one of the strengths of the season so far has been the Nacho storyline, and we didn't get any Nacho in this episode, and also the Gus storyline, his exploration of Gus, and we barely got any Gus in this episode, and also the Mike stuff we got in this episode was, in my opinion, kind of dragged out a bit too long. They could have summed up like what he was doing in one 3 or 4 minute scene. So mainly, like, the meat of this episode was the Jimmy stuff, and don't get me wrong, as I said, I really liked the Jimmy stuff, and I think this explored his character a lot more, but even so, it was a tad bit too slow moving for me, and I just think this episode is, comparatively speaking to the other 4 episodes, because I know, as I say repeatedly, Better Call Saul is always a slow burn, and I'm always in love with that. But I think comparatively speaking, this episode was a bit slower than the other episodes this season. So maybe I wasn't as enthralled with it as I had been with the previous episodes. But again, not a bad episode at all. So anyway, let me get in. Let's explore this episode. Let's get into some of the interesting things that happened in this episode. So let's start with the opener. And this really surprised me because I watch Better Call. I live in New Zealand, so I watch Better Call Saul on a streaming service called Lighthouse, which is the official streaming service in New Zealand where Better Call Saul airs. Like when Bob Odenkirk came to New Zealand to promote the show, he's like, go to Lightbox and watch Better Call Saul. And so, like, but Lightbox also has Breaking Bad, and for some reason, sometimes when I go to watch Better Call Saul, it deflects me to Breaking Bad. So when I started watching this episode, I thought that's what happened. I thought that I accidentally clicked on Breaking Bad, or like bunted me to Breaking Bad. And so I had to like recheck at the bottom. Is this actually? But no, it says Better Call Saul because this is the first time that we get a scene, you could call it a flash forward, really, because the bulk of the story, Better Call Saul, it takes place before this. So this is like a future scene, even though you could say it's kind of a past scene. It depends on your perspective, but regardless, this is the first time they show us, like, Saul Goodman during Breaking Bad times. It's the first time we see this in the show. We see post Breaking Bad times with Gene in Omaha, but this is the first time to actually... And it's really interesting to contrast to see Bob Odenkirk play this character the way he was in Breaking Bad times, which is completely different than the way Jimmy is now. And I think... I really like that decision. I think they did it to show that this is what Jimmy is turning into at the moment. That Saul is a lot more cynical. Like, you see his interactions between him and Francesca, which is completely different than what we've seen of Francesca in Better Call Saul so far. But those who have seen Breaking Bad know that's the interaction that they end up having, is that they have a really sort of standoffish, sort of hate relationship type thing, and you can see bits of Jimmy coming through Saul as well, as he tries to, they do the title of the episode where he says it's quite a ride, and he's trying to say like that he enjoyed it. You know from like the Gene stuff in the future that he enjoys his time and he lusts for the time of being Saul Goodman again, but he doesn't have that sort of friendship, that camaraderie that Jimmy currently has in the Better Call Saul timeline with like Kim and other characters. And so when he tries to hug Francesca, she's like, whatever. And so it shows what kind of an empty life that he's leading compared to what he has before, and yet it's something that he lusts for. In this case, it shows him looking back on being Saul Goodman and enjoying that and saying it's quite a ride, whereas in the present Better Call Saul timeline, he's looking forward to that. Like, he wants to become Saul, like he wants that kind of scheming because it's just what he enjoys, but it also portrays how empty that life is, which I really enjoyed. And it's also great getting the perspective because we didn't get a scene like this on Breaking Bad, but it takes place at the same time as like towards the end of season 5 when the show's wrapping up, when Saul, Walter White gets caught and Saul is caught up in that, and so he has to burn everything and leave. So yeah, I hope they do more scenes like this. I thought it was a very interesting way, and I really liked being surprised and showed something that I wasn't expecting. But that being said, it doesn't have that much to do with the rest of the episode, although the themes I brought up do come into play about how this is what he wants to become. So I do think it was necessary, and I do like it. But anyway, then we get into present times, or what I call present times anyway, of Jimmy. He's at home with Kim, and you can see their relationship is kind of falling apart, and I think this is portrayed right well. If you look at the way that Jimmy and Kim interact, I think it shows that they've become sort of distant and hollow with each other, and I think this relationship is doomed. A lot of people will say, like, wonder what happens to Kim, how come she's not still around in Jimmy's life in Breaking Bad times, and I think they're making it clear that these two are not going to be together that much longer. And also another thing I was going to say about the opening scene is that when Jimmy gives Francesca a card and says, here's a lawyer, he's really good, he'll help you out, and they didn't reveal what lawyer is saying, so you make you wonder, is it Kim? Although Francesca does know Kim, like she's met her, so you think that if it was Kim, he would say, go to Kim, because she knows who Kim is. So maybe it was Howard, or maybe it was someone else. I don't know, but you think it was someone that he knew as Jimmy McGill, because he said, tell him Jimmy sent you, rather than Saul. And I think that will probably come into play, like, who is this lawyer that Jimmy was referring to? But regardless, I kind of don't think it was Kim. Not just because Francesca knew her, but just because I don't think that's kind of the direction that they're pushing her towards. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, she could still be around Albuquerque, but I get the impression, I don't know. But I think there's definitely something, you can tell the way that Jimmy and Kim are interacting with each other, that they've both been so affected by Chuck's death, and they're both sort of deflecting that feelings, and it sort of made them they're both dealing with their own personal shit, I'll put it that way. And I think it's making it hard for them to interact, and they try to make each other feel better, but I think it's not really working. So it's interesting how, because Kim is like overworking herself, so when she goes home with Jimmy, she can't enjoy time with them. She has to sit there and get caught up on her work, and Jimmy, for his part, is just sitting there watching TV is not satisfying for him. He wants to be going out and doing shit and scamming people. He lusts for that now, and so we see him. He leaves in the middle of the night, or not in the middle of the night, but while they're watching TV, and it's like, I got something to do at work, and so he buys all the cell phones with the money he got from, selling that little figurine, and goes off to sell all the cell phones, like in the black market, so to speak. So he goes to that hot dog stand we've seen before, and he's like hustling. And this is maybe went on a bit more longer than necessary, because I think it got his point across. I mean, it had a lot of cool shots with him looking up through the trunk and whatnot, but maybe a little bit too long. And it was interesting, like they had the biker gang come up, and like everyone's scared of them, and you could see the look on Jimmy's face that he's mustering up. He's like, I have to go and try to sell these to these guys, and he does a great job. But then he goes back to leave, and those punk kids we saw at the start of the montage to come up to him, and he's like, yeah, piss off, kids. But they beat the crap out of him and steal his money. And so and then it was interesting seeing him reminisce with Kim about it, where he tells her pretty much the truth. He just leaves out the part about selling the cell phones. And it's interesting that when he's reminiscing about it, he's like, I should have seen those punks coming from miles away. And also, like back in his day, Slippin' Jimmy, they wouldn't touch him. Like they would know who he is because he was one of them. But Kim points out, well, you're not one of them anymore. And Jimmy's like, yeah. And you see that he's longing to be Slippin' Jimmy again. You can see that in his character. But I think he's sort of coming to terms with that he isn't, his life is totally different now. And I think you get that throughout the rest of this episode, when he goes to the office to check in on his PPD, and he's saying, I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to get back with my partner, we're going to open up, and things are going to go right back to the way they were. So that's the other side of him. It's interesting, he has like two halves, and I think that's what we know will become in this character. He will combine those two halves and be the sleazy lawyer. So I think it's building towards that. Now, also interesting about the scene when he goes to the courthouse is that he encounters Howard. And I really like this scene. I thought it was great because Howard, of course, is a total mess. And he's falling apart. He's talking about how insomnia is like he wouldn't wish it upon his worst enemy. It's absolutely horrible. And so Jimmy's like, oh, well, here's I'll give you this number of a psychologist that you can go see. And Howard's like, I'm already seeing one. Now, I think this, and then we see Jimmy takes the number of the psychologist and he flushes it in the toilet. Now, I think this is a really interesting scene because what it's basically saying is Jimmy does not want to confront his feelings about his guilt or his sadness or his anger over Chuck's death. We've seen this all season. He's being distant. He's trying not to talk about it as much as possible. He is completely avoiding these feelings. And what Howard is doing, Howard is confronting these feelings head on. He's being very open about it. In fact, going to see his shrink, their main goal is to bring up these feelings, and so you must confront these feelings and overcome them. In order to overcome them, you must confront them and bring them up, and that's made Howard a total fucking mess. And I think Jimmy sees that, and so he realizes that the last thing he wants to do is to confront his feelings. The last thing he wants to do is acknowledge his feelings over Chuck's death, and he wants to just hide from it as much as possible, which is why he flushes the number down the toilet, because he doesn't want a shrink to bring up all his feelings of guilt and sadness that he's feeling over his brother's death. In fact, instead he just wants to hide from it, which is basically also what Kim is doing in a way. She's also kind of hiding from her feelings of guilt from Chuck, and she's immersing herself in like good deeds and doing PD work and helping out others in order to I know it's her way, because it's interesting the two different ways these two characters deal with their guilt, because Jimmy deals with it by letting Chuck's opinion of him being no good and worthless sink in and sort of control him and want that lust to con people. Whereas Kim wants to wrap herself in good deeds. She wants to go out and help people. And so last episode I said I wondered if Judge Neelix was going to put Kim to work as a PD because he threatened her, but this episode we just see she is a public defender. She's going right there doing public defender work, and apparently that's what she wanted to do. Now, I will say, I think I have to look up this guy's name because I can't remember his name, but he was the prosecutor guy we saw in the very first episode of season 1. He had this banter type with Jimmy, which I absolutely loved. And we see him again in this episode, and I love this guy. In fact, in the last episode when we saw Kim at the courthouse, I was going to say, I wonder if we're going to see this character again because I like him so much. And we get the one scene with him and Kim trying the case, and he's being stubborn. We always see him being stubborn. I think, is it Oakley? Yeah, I think his name is Oakley. Yeah. Anyway, we see him being stubborn the way he always is and refusing to give in. And Kim's just like, all right, well, I'll tell the judge that they didn't read the Miranda rights and all the information was gathered illegally. And just the way she played it, and he was trying to be all hard-ass, but she knew he was going to give in. And this is sort of Kim's... This is what Jimmy's conning is. Like, when Jimmy cons people and he's able to, make money off the cell phones and convince the bikers to buy the cell phones and stuff like that, that's a rush for him. That is, he enjoys it. That's him being in his prime. That's it's what he loves to do. And for Kim, this is what she loves to do, rather than just filing bank papers and whatever what she's doing with Mercer Verde. She loves being able to play like the prosecutor and the way she does here in order to help someone. And then I like how that particular client was just like, oh man, I gotta do probation, that's bullshit, and being an ungrateful little shit for what she just did for him, quite frankly. And I love how she puts him in this place too. It's like, look, you're going to jail, and if you do illegal shit again, I'm not going to help you next time. You will go to jail. And so that was great. And again, and we see her helping out someone else who's too afraid to go to court. She's like, look, if you don't, you're going to go to jail for sure. I can't do anything about it. But if you don't go to court, it's going to be a hell of a lot worse for you. And then, of course, the Mercer Verde called and be like, look, we have this crisis. We need you to come in right now. She's like, no, can't do it. Just hangs up, brushes them off. Because she's with her client that she really wants to help, and that's her wheelhouse. That's what she wants to do. That's her way of overcoming her feelings of guilt. Again, she's hiding from her feelings of guilt. Instead of dealing with them, she goes out and helps others. Now, what's interesting is the Mercer Verde, when she's encountered by Paige at Mercer Verde, and she's rightfully pissed. And like, look, you told us you would be completely devoted to us. We had a crisis. You did not come when you said you would. That is unacceptable. And it's interesting here to see Kim's reaction, because she had the perfect opportunity here to be like, I think you're right. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm up to doing this task anymore. I don't think I'm the right person. I'm going to have to resign and recommend that you go to another firm, go to HHM or whatever, so I can go and do the public defender work. She had the perfect opportunity to do that, but she didn't. Instead, she apologized and said it would never happen again. And so I think it shows that she's kind of torn as well. She's unwilling to commit. She doesn't want to completely go back to being a PD, even though that's obviously her passion at the moment, rather than being the Mercer Verde. But she's not quite willing to let go of that lifestyle yet. So I think this is obviously going to lead to something bad for her, that choice of indecision. Obviously, something's going to come to a head. I don't think she's going to be able to be as fully devoted to Mercer Verde as she's promising to be. Anyway, let's move over to the Mike stuff. So last episode, we saw that Gus had a job that he wanted Mike to do, and Mike seemed all more than willing to do it. And so we see what that job was. It's basically to Gus is basically interviewing like structural engineers, like shady ones, shall we say, to build an underground facility underneath his, his facility, which we know from Breaking Bad. If you've seen Breaking Bad, it's the giant super meth lab that Walt and Jesse work in, that's hidden underneath this factory. And so now we see Gus making plans. And of course this has to do with all season we've seen Gus trying to push things in motion to make his own drugs and become his own crime lord, with not being dependent on the cartel, which I talked about last week. And we're seeing the origins of that here, which is all well and good. But I think as I said, I think they dragged this out too long. It took forever to get to the point, which was basically just a big nudge about, see, this is where the super meth lab came from, and it seemed like we didn't really need that much just for a Breaking Bad nudge and a notch. Now, to be fair, I did like how they, the first guy came in, he was all super confident. It was like, oh, I can do this in 7 weeks. And Gus is like, okay, not interested. And then the other guy came in and he was like, oh, this is going to be horrible. This is going to be difficult. This is going to be so hard. We have this problem. We have that problem, blah, blah, blah. And Gus is like, are you saying it's impossible? And he's like, well, no, not impossible, just difficult. It's like, you're hired. So I guess that was kind of interesting. And it's also, of course, interesting seeing Mike starting to jump into that role of Gus's right-hand man. I think that's probably the most important thing about these scenes. But again, I think it could have been accomplished in less of the time that it took. But that's just my opinion. I know a lot of people will disagree with me, but whatever. Anyway, my rating for Quite a Ride out of 10 is a 6. Good episode. Really enjoyed it. A lot of great character moments with Jimmy McGill and Kim, saying what their character's going to be like. But not one of the best. I wasn't completely enthralled with this episode. I think there had been better episodes this season, and the episodes in the middle of the season I do think tend to dip a bit, which I think this episode has fallen prey to. But the grand scheme of things, not a bad one. Not too badly, anyway. Anyway, that is it for my review of Quite a Ride. I will be back here every week to continue to review every episode of Better Call Saul, so be sure to check me out for that. Also, check out my channel as I do many other reviews on other shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.